Welcome to this another class on US history. I trust that things are sounding interesting and you're loving it. Let us pause a prayer. Father, thank you for your goodness and grace, your mercy and your truth, your wisdom, your knowledge, your understanding, your control. Some, Lord, I pray, even now, Lord, that you take control of me, take control of the participants and the system now available, some, Lord, as we seek to build your kingdom. Praise some, Lord, to be with us, lead us, guide us, shield us. Amen. Now, we're going to pick up where we left off. Within a generation of initial contact with Europeans, the Caribs, who gave the Caribbean its name, were virtually extinct. The Algonquin communities of New England experienced appalling rates of death. One Massachusetts colonist reported in 1630 that the Indian peoples of his region, above 12 years since, were swept away by a great and grievous plague, so that there are very few to inhabit the country. Settlers possessed no knowledge of germ theory. It was not formulated until the mid 17th century, and speculated that a Christian God had providentially cleared the wilderness of heathens. Historical demographers now estimate that some tribes suffered a 90 to 95% population loss within the first century of European contact. The death of so many Indians decreased the supply of indigenous laborers who were needed by the Europeans to work the mines. So they were only important to work. They were needed to work the mines. I see. Well, the Europeans would have to do it themselves now. That's all the purpose they saw the Indians for. And to grow stable crops. To work the mines and grow stable crops, such as sugar and tobacco. The decimation of native populations may have persuaded colonists throughout the New World to seek a substitute labor force in Africa. Indeed, the enslavement of blacks has been described as an effort by Europeans to repopulate the New World. Indians who survived the epidemics often found that the fabric of traditional culture had come unraveled. The enormity of the death toll and the agony that accompanied it called traditional religious beliefs and practices into question. These survivors lost not only members of their families, but also elders who might have told them how properly to bury the dead and give spiritual comfort to the living. Some native people, such as the Iroquois, who live, and let me spell it, Iroquois, who lived some distance away from the coast and thus had more time to adjust to the challenge, withstood the crisis better than did those who immediately confronted the Europeans and Africans. Refugee Indians from the hardest hit eastern communities were absorbed into healthier Western groups. Nonetheless, the cultural and physical shock that the dwindling Native American population experienced is beyond these historians' power ever fully to comprehend. Wow. 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 It is simply alarming. Simply alarming. Sudden and sweeping disruptions of the environment are now almost commonplace, but an even greater ecological revolution than that witnessed following the end of the World War II occurred in the century after Columbus' voyages. European explorers, African slaves, and Native Americans brought together three remarkably different worlds that had been physically separated for millennia. The exchange of plants, animals, and diseases transformed the social history of the old world as well as the new. Differences in the forms of life in the two hemispheres astonished the first explorers. They had expected America to be an extension of Europe, a place inhabited by familiar plants and animals. They were surprised. The exotic flora of the New World, sketched by Europeans 16th century drawings, included the food staple maize and the succulent pineapple. Succulent pineapple. Equally strange to European eyes were buffalo, rattlesnakes, catfish, and the peculiar absence of horses and cattle. No domestic animal was common to both sides of the Atlantic except the dog. And perhaps the most striking difference was between the people themselves. Both Native Americans and Europeans found each other to be the most exotic people they had ever encountered. The most immediate biological consequence of contact between the people of these three startlingly dissimilar continents was the transfer of disease. With the year of Columbus's return from the Caribbean, syphilis appeared in Europe for the first time and became known as the American disease. Syphilis. By 1505, it had spread all the way to China. The effect of old world diseases in the Americas was catastrophic. Native Americans had little natural immunity to common African and European diseases because America remained biologically isolated after the re-immersion of the Bering re-immersion of the Bering Land Bridge. When they were exposed to influenza, typhus, measles, and especially smallpox, they died by the millions. Indeed, Europeans' exploration of America set off the worst demographic disease in world history. Within 50 years of the first contact, epidemics had virtually exterminated the native population of Hispaniola and devastated the densely populated valley of Mexico. Hispaniola. Also unsettling, but by no means as destructive, was the transfer of plants and animals from the old world to the new. Spanish colonizers carried sugar and bananas across the Atlantic, and in time, these crops transformed the economies of Latin America. In time. Even more spectacular was the success of European animals in America. During the 16th century, pigs, sheep, and cattle arrived as passengers on European ships, and in the fertile New World environment, they multiplied more rapidly than they had in Europe. Some animals survived shipwrecks on Sable Island, a small, desolate island off the coast of Nova Scotia. One can still see the small, long haired cattle, the successors of the earliest cattle transported to America. Other animals escaped from the ranches of New Spain, generating new breeds like the fabled Texas Longhorn. No European animal more profoundly affected Native American life than the horse. Once common in North America, the horse mysteriously disappeared from the continent sometime during the last ice age. Mm-mm. The early Spanish explorers reintroduced the horse to North America, and the sight of this large, powerful animal at first terrified the Indians. Mounted conquistadors discovered that if they could not frighten Indian foes into submissions, they could simply outmaneuver them on horseback. The Native Americans of the Southwest quickly adapted the horse to their own use. Sedentary farmers acquired new hunting skills, and soon the Indians were riding across the Great Plains in pursuit of buffalo. Comanche, Apache, Sioux, and Blackfoot tribes, just to name a few, became dependent on the horse. Mounted Indian warriors galloped into battle, unaware that it was their white adversaries who had brought the horse to America. Equally dramatic was the effect of American crops on European and African societies. From his first trip to the New World, Columbus brought back a plant that revolutionized the diets of both humans and animals: maize. Mhm. During the next century, American beans, squash, and sweet potatoes appeared on European staples or tables. The pepper and tomato, other New World discoveries, added a distinctive flavor to Mediterranean cooking, despite strong prohibitions on the use of tobacco in places like Russia. European demand for tobacco grew astronomically during the 17th century. The potato caught on more slowly in Europe because of a widespread fear that root crops cause disease. The most rapid acceptance of the white potato came in Ireland, where it became a diet staple in the 1600s. Irish immigrants, unaware of the genealogy of this Native American crop, reintroduced the potato into Massachusetts Bay in 1817, and in West Africa, corn gradually replaced traditional animal feeds of low yield. It is referred to as the Columbian Exchange. Columbian Exchange. The continents benefited from the exchanges. Columbian Exchange. Let us look a little at West Africa and the people and their lifestyle. During the era of the European slave trade, a number of enduring myths about sub-Saharan West Africa were propagated. Even today, commentators claim that the people who inhabited this region 400 years ago were isolated from the rest of the world and had a simple self-sufficient economy. Indeed, some scholars still depict this vast region stretching from the Senegal River south to modern Angola as a single cultural unit, as if at one time all the men and women living there must have shared a common set of political, religious, and social values. Sub-Saharan West Africa defies as such easy generalizations. The first Portuguese who explored the African coast during the 15th century encountered a great variety of political and religious cultures. Many hundreds of years earlier, Africans living in this region had come into contact with Islam, the religion founded by the Prophet Muhammad during the 7th century. Islam spread slowly Arabia from Arabia into Black Africa. Not until AD 1030 did a kingdom located in the Senegal Valley accept the Muslim religion. Many other West Africans, such as those in ancient Ghana, resisted Islam and continued to observe traditional religions. Muslim traders from North Africa and the Middle East brought a new religion to parts of West Africa, while they expanded sophisticated trade networks that linked the villages of Senegambia with urban centers in northwest Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, and Cyrenaica. Great camel caravans regularly crossed the Sahara, carrying trade goods that were exchanged for gold and slaves. Sub-Saharan Africa's well-developed links with Islam surprised a French priest who in 1686 observed African pilgrims going to visit Mecca to visit Mahomet's tomb, although they are 11 or 1200 leagues distant from it. When Islam was spreading, Christianity was not spreading. Was not spreading at all. West Africans spoke many different languages and organized themselves into diverse political systems. The West African strip is a large strip, very large, thousands of miles. Several populous states, sometimes termed empires, exercised loose control over large areas. Ancient African empires such as Ghana were vulnerable to external attack as well as internal rebellion, and the oral and written histories of this region record the rise and fall of several large kingdoms. When European traders first arrived, the list of major states would have included Mali, Benin, and Congo. Many other Africans lived in what are known as stateless societies, really largely autonomous communities organized around lineage structures. In these respects, African and Native American cultures had much in common. African and Native American culture. Whatever the form of government, men and women found their primary social identity within well-defined lineage groups, which consisted of persons claiming descent from a common ancestor. Disputes among members of lineage groups were generally settled by clan elders. These senior leaders allocated economic and human resources. They determined who received land and who might take a wife. Determined that. They determined that. So, disputes among members of lineage groups were generally settled by clan elders. These senior leaders allocated economic and human resources. They determined who received land and who might take a wife. Critical decisions, because within the villages of West Africa, women and children cultivated the fields. These communities were economically self-sufficient. Not only were they able to grow enough food to feed themselves, but they also produced trade goods such as iron, coal, and gum. The first Europeans to reach the West African coast by sail were the Portuguese. Strong winds and currents along the Atlantic coast moved southward, which meant a ship could sail with the wind from Portugal to West Africa without difficulty. How did it come back? Wow. The problem was returning. Exactly. Is all well and good to go down. How do you get back? The problem was returning. Advances in maritime technology allowed the Portuguese to overcome these difficulties by constructing a new type of ship, one uniting European hull design with lateen, that's a triangular, sails from the Middle East. Portuguese caravels were often to navigate successfully against African winds and currents. During the 15th century, Portuguese sailors discovered that by sailing far to the west, often as far as the Azores, they could, on their return trips to Europe, catch a reliable westerly wind. Columbus was evidently familiar with this technique. Before attempting to cross the Atlantic Ocean, he sailed to the Gold Coast, and on the way he undoubtedly studied the wind patterns that would carry his famed caravels to the New World and back again. Gold Coast, that is in the region of West Africa. The Portuguese journeyed to Africa in search of gold and slaves. Mali and Jollof officials were willing partners in this commerce, but insisted that Europeans respect trade regulations established by Africans. They required the Europeans to pay tolls and other fees and restricted the foreign traders to conducting their business in small forts or castles located at the mouths of the major rivers. Local merchants acquired some slaves and gold in the interior and transported them to the coast where they were uploaded or they were exchanged for European manufactures. Transactions were calculated in terms of local African currencies. A slave would be offered to a European trader for so many bars of gold or ounces of gold. So many bars of iron or ounces of gold. rather, bars of iron, an ounce of gold. What they did iron to do, I don't know, but they needed, right? And they Africa was producing iron too. European slave trades European slave traders accepted these terms, largely because they had no other choice. The African states fielded formidable armies, and outsiders soon discovered that they could not impose their will on this region simply by demonstrations of force. Moreover, local diseases proved so lethal for Europeans, 6 out of 10 of them whom would die 6 out of 10 of whom would die within a single year's stay in Africa, that they were happy to avoid dangerous trips to the interior. The slaves were usually men and women taken captive during wars. Others were victims of judicial practices designed specifically to supply the growing African market. By 1650, most West African slaves were destined for the New World rather than the Middle East. Even before Europeans colonized the New World, the Portuguese were purchasing almost 1,000 slaves a year on the West African coast. The slaves were frequently forced to work on the sugar plantations of Madeira. And Madeira is in Portugal, and the Canaries or Madeira, not really in Portugal, but was controlled by the Portuguese. A small island, and the Canary Islands, is a nest of islands controlled by the Spaniards. Atlantic islands on which Europeans experimented with forms of unfree labor that would later be more fully and more ruthlessly established in the American colonies. It is currently estimated that approximately 10.7 million Africans were taken to the New World as slaves, and the figures differ from source to source. The figure for the 18th century alone is about 5.5 million, of which more than one third came from West Central Africa. The Bight of Benin, the Bight means bay, the Bight of Biafra, and the Gold Coast supplied most of the others. The peopling of the New World is usually seen as a story of European navigations. Come again. The peopling of the New World is usually seen as a story of European migrations, yes. But in fact, during every year between 1650 and 1831, more Africans than Europeans came to the Americas. As historians Davis Eltis writes, in terms of immigration alone, America was an extension of Africa, rather than Europe until late in the 19th century. In ancient times, the West possessed a mythical appeal to people living along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Classical writers speculated about the fate of Atlantis, a fabled Western civilization that was said to have sunk beneath the ocean. Fallen Greek heroes allegedly spent eternity in an uncharted western paradise, but because the ships of Greece and Rome were all designed to sail the open ocean, the lands to the west remained the stuff of legend and fantasy. In the 5th century, an intrepid Irish monk, Saint Brendan, reported finding enchanted islands far out in the Atlantic. He even claimed to have met a talking whale named just Conius, who allowed the famished Voyager to cook a meal on his back. Wow. Fables. Fables. Time has flown, and we have to break here. So I encourage you to do your reflection by listening the video. Do your reflection and email me. God bless you.